So at this time, there's a lot of activity going on with drones and people trying to figure out what's going on, especially up in the Northeast. So right off the bat, Jay, can you give us your take on all the controversy that we're seeing in the news and on social media?
Yeah, for sure. And I'll preface it by saying no one knows 100% for sure. I have a feeling a couple people very high level in government do, but
Welcome to the Security Connection podcast. I'm your host, Joe Souza. This podcast is your bridge to the world of security, connecting you with leading experts and innovators in the field. Together, we'll explore valuable security insights, share compelling stories, and uncover the latest advancements in technology. In addition to being an Air Force veteran, I've had a security career spanning over 3 decades, working in several industries, including Department of Defense, manufacturing, retail, and higher education. Today, I serve as the Chief Operating Officer for Serverly. Serverly is a security solutions provider helping organizations design and implement advanced security systems. Thank you for tuning in. Let's dive into today's conversation. My guest is Jake Shild, CEO of LandSkyAI. Jake, welcome to the Security Connection podcast. Please tell our audience about yourself.
yeah, thanks for having me on, Joe. Really excited. I'm CEO of LandSkyAI. We're a turnkey drone and robotics provider focused on the security space. Partnered with Serverly and just really excited to work with Serverly to advance security technology across the industry and really help end users and partners alike find different ways to innovate.
Yeah, that's great. And we're certainly thrilled to have you as a partner as well. And your industry is among some of the most cutting edge in technology. But we're recording this episode at the end of 2024. So at this time, there's a lot of activity going on with drones and people trying to figure out what's going on, especially up in the Northeast, especially where you are, Jake. You're in the New York, New Jersey area. There's a lot of unconfirmed sightings of what's going on. So right off the bat, Jake, can you give us your take on all the controversy that we're seeing in the news and on social media?
Yeah, for sure. And I'll preface it by saying no one knows 100% for sure. I have a feeling a couple people very high level in government do, but I was even right when this was really starting to pick up in the news, was actually at one of these groups. It's called NLEA. It's National Law Enforcement Associates. They were having a holiday luncheon, which they have every year. And I could tell you all, a lot of former, even current law enforcement, they're different, federal to state to local. And they all definitely had no idea either. They were also just asking me what my thoughts were because, I just mentioned we have a drone company and usually that makes someone want to ask those questions. But even there, no one really had a perfect idea. I will say from being in the drone space and robotic space, no competitors, no companies we are partnered with or work with were definitely doing anything related to that. From the look of them, there definitely were some drones that were, as they were even saying, admitting at one point, the government, like SUV size, ones that would not be commercial. And I have to imagine definitely some probably from, high ranking or I'd say military to defense contractor style drones going around. I'm sure there were a lot of copycats at the time too. Once people were flying, heard about that, they started to send their drones up, and some of them definitely were planes people were seeing. But there definitely was. I know even an employee of my company works out in New Jersey. He saw some of them, and he knew they definitely weren't. He knows drones. He's even comes from like Israeli Air Force background too, and he knew for sure those were not usual drones you see. So we definitely think it's more government related. For us, we also think it's a good part of the good part of when these things happen, and thankfully there's no harm caused by any of this, but at least it gets a conversation started. I've always thought we've been very lucky. There's been no real harm that's happened from, unauthorized drones flying into, whether it's over stadiums, other places. For now, it's only shut down games, but I think it kind of adds some credence to taking, even like drone detection and mitigation seriously.
Yeah, so you said, you mentioned harm, with the use of drones, and certainly that's a concern everyone has with these sightings as well. And we won't focus on the harm aspect. We're going to talk about drones and robotics for the use as a security tool and how it can really help security professionals and government officials, keep crowd safe, monitor activities, and do things for good. There was one other story recently in the Orlando area. I'm in Central Florida, and there was one of those drone shows, and something happened, and the drones started falling out of the sky. And it's the first time I think that I've seen that happen. And unfortunately, one boy was hurt. He's okay. He was in the hospital at the time, again at the time of recording. But any thoughts on the the mass configuration and flying of drones in that capacity, Jake?
Yeah, so it's interesting because, I mean, it is pretty incredible when you think about it because those drone shows have been pretty widespread for, I mean, years now. I think I know even Olympics years ago that was already going on. I saw the video on Instagram. I thought it was pretty unexpected. It just popped up on my line. I mean, I haven't seen that happen before. I will say the technology they use software wise for a lot of that is pretty mature and advanced at this point because you have a couple of the companies that do all the large, drone light shows or these different versions of the shows throughout the country. I mean, it is an interesting concept because a lot of times you really just have one person on a computer that might control a mass amount of drones, but it does show maybe I don't know anything exactly about what happened with that drone provider, whether it's software glitch. I kind of assume that it was because it kind of started sending all the drones out, but it does show. I mean, there is still some vulnerability when using them. There's always been that other thought of if anyone was to try to hack into systems like that, do anything like that, but I was surprised to see it. It is. I know companies that operate that are usually they've been doing it for a long time and have some pretty mature technology, but it's definitely a crazy one to see.
Yeah, agreed. So let's switch to security, Jake. So from your perspective, how has drone technology for physical security evolved to its current functionality, and where do you see things going in the future?
Yeah, so right now, I would say if you even think years back and when drones were first becoming popular, right away there was the thoughts of, how could we use this for security? How could law enforcement use this? That's especially, right away, DJI was very fast to market and got there immediately. And obviously, I mean, now there's other issues related to federal government, DJI, but they're quick to the market. And I think right away, a lot of law enforcement even realized that, hey, we could fly these around. We could look for, if we're on a chase and, someone goes into the woods, we could send the drone up, start to search, maybe a thermal device. So there's always from the beginning some different level of security used through it. Now it's getting to a stage where it's going from a lot of manual control to a lot of automated control. We work a lot with these systems called drone in a box, more of like an engineering term, but the idea is these drones that fly out of a base station, do patrols. Just in general, even a lot of these drones that used to be what we'd call normal manual drones and still are, they might have a remote control, but even then, a lot of times you're now able to track onto people, automatically send it to different locations. So it has been really interesting to see the evolving landscape of it. And really, most of it is going to be around how keeps becoming more automated, how these drones are going to continue flying their own routes, how what really will be the next steps of it are more like if then functions of it, kind of like coding, but it'd be the idea of the drone can maybe see someone and then you can need to tell it to track onto an individual, but instead you'd be able to have actions where drone gets to waypoint, it sees a person's not supposed to be there, automatically maybe turns on the spotlight on the drone or sends out a message if it has a speaker on it in the future. And a lot of it is gonna, I think, over the next year or two, be a lot of these actions on their own that they're gonna be able to take. You'll still always need a pilot watching somewhere, but I do think it's just gonna become more and more automated, and a lot of that human input now is actually very valuable for feedback because then when pilots are watching, they could see, okay, it shouldn't have actually responded to this scenario as it did, but I think a lot of it's just been moving more and more towards automation, like a lot of other industries. And I think it's just going to keep getting more advanced, and safety is going to keep going up as well. Because as strong as we are as humans, a lot of times if you could eliminate the chances of mistakes, it's always going to be much safer.
Yeah, so I'll go back 10 years. I was the assistant director of security at the University of Central Florida in Orlando. And at the time, they had shortly thereafter brought in Scott Frost as their new football coach. And they wanted to bring a lot of hype around that new hire and the excitement around the football program. And interestingly enough, Scott Frost left and is now back as head coach there. But they wanted the marketing team at the athletics organization wanted to do a hype video. So they said, how better can we do this than to have drones? Well, most of you know that you can't, if you're flying commercially, you're not supposed to fly over people. You're not supposed to fly over certain crowd sizes before and after a game of a stadium of a certain size. There's a lot of rules that are put into place. And deconflicting that just for the purpose of trying to do a hype video was really challenging for us. So we ended up contacting the FAA and the drone program and talking to those folks about how to do this. So we had enough time to do this. We hired a professional drone pilot that commercially flew, and he flew, and he recorded videos like, motorboats and racing and high action stuff. So the shot they wanted to get was the cheerleaders and the players rushing the field before the kickoff. So that was really interesting for us to do. So the chief at the time said, Joe, you're in charge of security, and I don't have an officer that can do this, so you go coordinate this entire activity. And I guess it went well enough that they said, you now own the drone program on campus. And what did that mean for us? That meant trying to, stop rogue students from flying their drone to the actual, engineering teams that wanted to try to build drones and fly them on campus, providing safe spaces for this to do so. We had another company that was just off campus that wanted to do final flight tests before delivery of their drones. So that really started consuming a lot of time. But I had one freshman student that had flown and done some real estate photography, videography using his drone. He said, hey, I just want to be able to fly my drone. How can I do that? Well, he happened to have a Part 107 license, which, as you know, is one of the requirements. And if you fly commercially, you have to be licensed and have your drone registered and all of that. So I ended up, really learning a lot about that. But we started using them more for events. So protests, pre-game for the football game to see how the tailgating was going on, or traffic, where we didn't have traffic cameras and things like that. And then we started using them for other special events. So with that said, Jake, talk to us about how drones can be used by law enforcement and security for special events.
Yeah, so we see similar to how you learned when you were still at that position, probably, I'm sure, spearheaded a lot of those ideas around the drones for events. But we do see that as a perfect application, just in the idea that it's very hard to be, and this is whether it's an event or doing a patrol of a property, just that eye in the sky when you're able to get that constant view, looking down from angles that you typically can, unless you had a helicopter, and we know the cost of even operating a helicopter for an hour, everything that's involved with that. But drones just for events are perfect for a few different scenarios I see. So I segment drones out when I'm talking events into two categories. We have free fly, which is just like a standard drone, like I've mentioned, like DJI. There's other companies too that use tethered drone systems. So then tethered drones, instead of a normal drone you think of where it's flying to different points, you're kind of freely using a controller with it. Tethered drone is usually connected to either a similar like base station or a battery pack that's on the ground. Cable runs up to the drone, constantly charging. Essentially, the idea is that you're not going to be able to fly to all these different locations anymore with it, but instead of having to rely on battery life, you can be up there for, the entirety of an event. You could be up there for the 12 hours it's going on. So it's 150, 200 feet in the air, doing constant surveillance. But I see both types of systems really being applicable and strong for event security and just even emergency response. Because one thing that's helpful when you're using drones is just getting constant analytics or data on how many people are on site, or being able to even just view where crowds are starting to form. It could be at a stadium. Maybe you want to see if one entrance is getting more crowded than the other. Even seeing local traffic from up there, seeing where individuals are approaching. If there is an emergency, or say even just a standard medical emergency, being able to, whether it's a tether drone to zoom in, maybe for emergency response, you have a free fly drone and you could actually have that respond quicker than a human could. So the idea with that one would be, God forbid, casualty event happens, something similar. being able to send a drone up and at least get eyes on what's happening while law enforcement or on-site security is on the way. That's a very helpful tool with drones for security, but a lot of it's even through prevention. So when you are getting that constant eye in the sky, again, where I'm seeing crowds forming, maybe identifying someone that's running, seeing different types of objects, and then even being able to use things like analytics or thermal on these different devices and having them up in the air for that amount of time proves very valuable. I think you're only going to keep seeing drones be used more and more for events. I'm still surprised sometimes at how the amount of large events there are where they might not be using drones at all still, but I think you're going to start to see a lot more free fly ones. Maybe it is only for emergency response, but even throughout the event, I mean, that's kind of one of the big things that I know came out of the first Trump assassination attempt was they were asking right away, were there drones being used? And there weren't. And, I mean, we know there are a lot of other security issues with that. But again, I mean, the idea is at least if you had a drone up in the air, you definitely would see someone going on a rooftop. So it gives you a vantage point again that really you're only had with helicopters. Even any watchtowers, things like that aren't mobile. But the idea is it's cost effective to use while also providing a lot of return on investment just from a safety and preventing issues from actually rising standpoint.
Yeah, you mentioned the Trump event, and I have experience working with presidential visits at the university level, and I do know that U.S. Secret Service very tightly controls what surveillance equipment can be used and by whom. I don't know if they have their own drone program. One would assume that they probably do, and they probably should have used that. But their mutual aid and their agencies that help support them, they don't let you use a lot of your assets that you have because they very tightly control that. So perhaps that was one of the things. Jake, you've talked a little bit, and this isn't really to disparage DJI as a company, but when people think of drones, they probably think of that DJI Mavic or other consumer-based drones that became really popular and consumer-friendly with their price point, and everyone could afford them. And there's all different sizes, shapes. But the government agencies started taking note that they were manufactured and made in China. So I don't know that a total ban exists, but several agencies have said you have to cease and desist using those. And that impacted a lot of government organizations, including UCF. We purchased a DJI drone and all the accessories and, quite an investment into that. And, a lot of those were purchased either with grant money or federal aid or their own budget. And, agencies don't have that type of budget to keep purchasing these time after time after time. So that restriction on DJI really put a pinch on a lot of the government agencies and contractors that were under government contracts from using those. We partnered when I was at UCF. We went up to the University of Florida in Gainesville for Richard Spencer is a white supremacist that spoke at Charlottesville, Virginia. His KKK supporters had run over, I think, an 18 or a 19-year-old student and killed her. University of Florida was the first university he was going to speak at after that event, and UF tried to stop it, but being a public university, they couldn't. They realized where the best place to have the event, they didn't have a lot of cameras on site, they didn't have a lot of perimeter cameras. We at UCF bought a bunch of mobile tripod cameras with a surveillance truck that we had outfitted to provide some security around the venue itself. But the county fire department up there, Alachua County, they have very skilled drone pilots, and they actually had a DJI Matrice at the time, and that's a very capable. It's used for movie making, as you know, and they use that to kind of, for public safety and security, use that to track those protesting crowds. And that's when we realized the value of the eye in the sky. And a helicopter for that event probably was possible, but the close proximity to the crowd and the capabilities of the payload, the cameras, the things you could put on there. And what we realized is the protesters moved on campus from place to place as they thought things were going on. And, we set up fixed cameras, so we didn't have great perspective. So talking more about that ban, what's your understanding of what that real impact is to the U.S. government and all those agencies that were using it? And how does LandSkyAI provide an alternative to those agencies that are looking for solutions that are really affected by this ban.
Yeah, so it is very interesting dilemma, I'd say, that law enforcement, a lot of other agencies are in, because just seeing both sides of the argument, not taking sides with one or the other, just for discussing it. But from one end, you do have DJI, which, if you're looking at purely value and value for technology, I'd say, because it is great technology and at its price point, really can't be beat on the market. So it's not for a lack of the ability of the technology. I know the argument. So the argument from the federal government side would be that these drones, and especially if you're using the software that DJI provides, that then it does have some vulnerability. I'm not sure if I have to look back. I'm not sure if they ever identified anything specific, but I do know it has to deal with the actual software operating the drones, where there is that concern. If you're flying it over federal agencies' properties, utilities, etc., that data could in some way make its way back to China, because it is a Chinese-owned company, and there is that fact of life that any company that large in China, I don't think it's controversial now, but it's true. Any company that large, the Chinese government is involved in some capacity, especially if there's something that could be made an argument for military technology they get off of it. So it's not that I don't think the federal government's really trying to, you know, I'd say screw anyone over in the U.S. or any of the agencies. So I think there is some logic behind it. But then I know the other side to that argument is there's not, for the price point, and especially with the funding a lot of these different agencies, or I should say state or local agencies get, it's very tough to find that similar technology at a point, especially if they were relying on grants or other technology, because the fact of it still is going to be that a lot of, whether it's US based or European, even maybe other Asian countries where some of this technology is coming from, it is going to be more expensive, and some of it isn't as mature yet. So it's kind of cuts both ways with the arguments where they go. I still think it makes sense for a lot of law enforcement agencies to start to look elsewhere, not saying it just because of the technology basis, but more so it does look like it's going to keep rearing its head in Congress, where they're going to keep bringing it up and trying to pass more bills banning it further, because at first it was just defense, and then they moved to more federal agencies, and then I'm sure they're going to find a way to I don't know if it'll be an outright ban, but I know they're going to try to at least get close to that at some point in the future. I don't know if it'll succeed or not, but that's kind of the way it's going. And I think, it's obvious too. It's not that like relations are getting any rosier. So I do think it makes sense for law enforcement agencies to at least discuss the possibility or start to look into alternatives. Florida, so where you guys are, obviously, like you were mentioning, that's already been a reality they've been having to do. But across the country, I think even just talking, whether it's us or even other drone system or drone technology companies, just to understand the different capabilities that are out there. Because you have a lot of different levels of systems, how advanced they are. Maybe you need some more basic, but you have a lot of systems with a lot of different customizations you could do. But I'd say it makes sense for a lot of these law enforcement agencies, and even if it wasn't purely technological basis, just on the idea that there is a reasonable chance that some states on their own are just moving to kind of rid the law enforcement agencies or other groups of some of these DJI based products, where at the least they should be looking into backup, or even discussing with companies like us what their other options are for security, and how they could actually if there was to say be a ban or anything got escalated, that they know then there's someone there, I'd say companies that they could work with and technology that they could plug in at that point.
Yeah, well said. So one of the things that I've learned about LandSkyAI is you have more than just drones. You have robotics as well, and those can be used for security in settings like construction, real estate, utilities, industrial facilities, manufacturing, distribution, campuses, healthcare. Tell us more about that part of your business and how those robots have enhanced security in those industries.
Yeah, so the ground robots are interesting, where we see them as a very good, if you're talking purely security, a very good physical deterrent. If you want to replicate that idea of, you get flashing lights, you get the constant surveillance, speakers, things such as that look to, long runtime replicate what you may see when maybe in like for an easy example, like a shopping center parking lot where you may see the car going by, the flashing lights, and it might just sit in a parking spot most of the time, and looking to see how you could automate and replicate some of those scenarios. But healthcare has actually been a very interesting one because there's a few different advantages and different types of robotics that, especially in the healthcare field, they could take advantage of. And one side is that peer security basis, especially with still ongoing labor shortages, high turnover, other issues that are going on, just being able to even have that constant deterrent or I'd say vehicle driving around, giving the command center constant views into what's going on, analytics providing that data back. But then on the other end, using it for things such as delivery, for example, maybe having the food department where they're actually able to fill in these robots with, for each floor, the different trays that need to go up, having them actually go to that floor. Maybe it stops at the nurse's station for them to hand out, or just even stops in front of individual patient rooms to have them delivered, to maybe having, say, draws on there, different pharmaceuticals delivered. And it doesn't have to just be healthcare, this example, but it's typically the one that makes the most sense and where a lot of the initial interest for this technology has come from, is not only due to that security aspect I was saying before, but these different robots that do these logistics focused functions. Because again, when you're talking about whether it's guarding, so for them they call them runners, and other positions where they're just delivering these items, these are a lot of times positions that are getting harder and harder to fill, harder to keep some employees in these positions. And then the cost and risk of, say, there's one hospital we're working with where they actually are having to go outdoors to essentially outdoors and indoors with these heavy carts that are like 500 to 700 pounds, pushing them along. People get injured. If it starts to fall, they think to, maybe I could keep it from falling, might get hurt. And then instead of them being able to have that client interaction time, or I should say patient interaction time, a lot of times they're just having to sit and waiting for the delivery and then going out, coming back. So there's a bunch of different issues related to that labor where, again, individuals, a lot of it when we talk to organizations, not that they're even necessarily always looking at an ROI just getting rid of an individual, but how they could even reallocate them to more efficient tasks instead of, say, those specific functions. Say, system delivers the food up to the floors, then they just have someone that's working in the building and takes it out of the robot and actually finishes the delivery, and it can still have a smile for a patient's face. To then, even with the guarding one, a lot of times they might not even have anything set up already, but they need that what we call force multiplier that's going around and acting as a constant deterrent. So it is really interesting what's going on the robotic side. I will say it still appears for just a pure security basis that drones, and sometimes just call them aerial robotics, but they're still, I'd say, where a lot of the demand has come from, or where a lot of initial interest is. And I think it has to do with, there is that combination of patrolling, but also emergency response, that it's harder to do emergency response with ground robots. They're purposely a little bit slower just because of some of the sensors built in. You don't want to risk it hitting into anyone, because they are very advanced with their obstacle avoidance, but work better when it's not going, as fast as a car. But the idea is, I think they're perfect as these physical deterrents out there, force multipliers, and then even helping out alleviate a lot of these different staffing issues that are really never went away after COVID.
Yeah, another good point. So we had experienced having a guard force at both universities. When you have people calling out sick and you have loss of coverage, the idea of doing a virtual guard tour either with a drone or a robot is really intriguing. And if it has sensors, it can do all the checks for you and give you a visual observation of what's going on. One of the things we were working on with you, Jake, is you mentioned in the hospital industry delivering food, but we also submitted a bid for a project that's in design right now for a high-rise apartment complex in a big metropolis area. And I didn't realize that I shouldn't have been surprised, but that you have offerings that, that robot can take the Uber Eats and someone in the lobby then puts it into the robot, which is dedicated to the high rise. And then it's outfitted with card access. So it's got the card readers that can go to any floor in the building because it will be a card access building with elevator controls, and then do that delivery point to point really without any issues. So it's a interesting thought where it has a mix of, security interacts with it, but it's really dedicated for food delivery service in a high-rise building, which is really interesting. We haven't talked a lot about as a service, Jake. So you not only sell everything we've talked about today, but you also provide these as a service. And I know, having run the program, not all agencies want to be bothered with having to get a pilot, train them, get them licensed, register their drone, have that upkeep and liability. Insurance is a big part of making sure that if you do hurt someone, that you're covered from a liability. So whether it's a commercial company, a government agency, can you tell us a little bit more about the as a service that you have and what benefits that has versus the acquisition of this type of hardware?
Yeah, so you definitely started to hit on some of it. And for us, when we look at it, the main point of, especially like we call our packages when we're talking about the virtual guard side, Sky Guard for the air and then Land Guard for the ground-based robotics. But the idea behind the whole as a service for these solutions or technologies off the fact that this is really built to, like we were saying, it has guard in the name. We're looking to have the uptime basically all the time at that point. Like we want the system always functional, ready to go. If you are looking to replicate that idea of the virtual guard, or I should say a guard, and now it's becoming a virtual guard, what we're looking to do with the service, we saw it as really important to have these different, I'd say, services bundled into the what we call it as a service package. So that's where you were talking about the piloting. A lot of large organizations we talk to, it's not that they don't have the money to necessarily hire pilots or even get people to train, but they don't want to go through the process because then now it becomes a special certification that they're say maybe it was a guard or a different staff member who needs to retain. And then if they do leave in 3 months, which is common in a lot of guarding environments, now they need to get someone retrained, need to pay them more. And then it's kind of like an ongoing cycle of trying to fill and get that piloting set up or even functioning of, say, some of these robotic systems. So then that's where we really find it crucial to include things like the remote pilots to operate them, just understanding how you even go through the regulatory process or, what different actions are going to be possible to really being able to fit it for each use case. Because again, we were just, as you're bringing up the example of the high rise, like it is different use cases and maybe we do have different technology we're putting onto the robot or drone to bundle into the package and making sure it's integrated to the on-site system. So wanting to make sure that, an alarm on the security system goes off, maybe a perimeter sensor of some sort. Maybe we want to make sure the drone flies out there, video is going back to the management system. Then that concept of always having the remote support available, the on-site and kind of constant remote support, I would say is pretty critical. Again, the idea is we want this to be that true virtual guard service is the whole concept. So then even extending the analytics, just making sure that we could build in all these functions that replicate as much and I'd say focus on the positives of what they want with guarding is what we're looking to do with the virtual guard. And then extend beyond that, of course. I'm not going to go into different benefits necessarily of what, would be our selling points of versus guarding. But the whole concept is technology we're looking to build in is to create that for, that true virtual guard scenario.
I love the thought of that as an augmentation to any security force. And the thought of having a drone that can automatically be dispatched or someone can fly it and go investigate in a really fast manner an alarm or an incident and get visual eyes on, that's really cool. And the other part too, the as a service, all those security folks out there, you might not have the budget for everything we just talked about, but you might have a special event once a year or a strawberry festival in your town or so many football games at your university, And the thought of not having to worry about the infrastructure, the hardware, the training, the certification, the rules of flying, and the skill of learning how to fly, because it really is a skill. That as a service option, I think, is somewhat intriguing because you could probably get in and add security with a professional organization taking all the heavy lifting off your hands.
Yeah, yeah.
So, so what I'd like to do now is I'd like to bring in Sean Sandel. Sean is our producer for this episode. He's also our director of sales and marketing at Serverly. Sean, what listener question do you have for Jake?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. And Jake, yeah, we touched on this a couple times during the podcast already, but I think it's a good question. So, I had a question come in: what AI-powered video surveillance capabilities are available via Landsky drones, and what problems can they solve?
Yeah, great question. And of course, I know we get the lot because AI is in the name of the company. But just from a basic level, even understanding it could start off on that simple aspect of it's patrolling a property and persons detected on site, automatically getting that alert after hours, or vehicles are detected to then actually being able to count. We extend that and create different, I'd say, even analytics so you could get an idea of where more people and vehicles are detected, what different waypoints do that. What we've actually do spend a lot of our time, kind of developing or testing on our own internally as a company is different analytics that work off of that. So we get asked a lot about interesting one, even kind of away from security for a second, has actually been on a lot of asset related inspections. So a lot of end users, they like the concept of security and they really understand that and like the idea, okay, I can know when there's a person after hours, I can automatically lock on to that individual and track them, or see if there's any unauthorized vehicles, and then even if we're flying low enough, be able to look at license plates. But beyond that is even the asset side, where we've talked to a lot of these larger companies that they might have, whether it's transformers or even just trailers in a yard, where they actually want to be able to track that, what serial number is on this, so I can see, what asset is parked over there, or maybe it's a barcode or other technology. So we've been doing a lot of research and testing into technology like that on the asset side. But security one, a lot of what we'll do beyond the person and vehicle. Some of it's like wildlife detection. One use case we've had is kind of like a deer deterrent capability, or even if there's, say, birds detected, to especially if it was going around a perimeter, to then even different forms of objects beyond people and vehicle. Maybe they want to just know in general when some sort of item is left on site, or fire smoke detection. So a lot of it is different security and safety functions, and most of it is designed to be proactive. So you're on that patrol, and instead of might be a site where they've had issues, people breaking in, taking catalytic converters from the vehicles parked on site, then at least if you can even whether it's catching them in the act, or at least getting them right before they see the drone, maybe they're approaching the property. And we do have a theory this is happening at some properties we work at, where they used to have a bunch of activity and now there's no activity happening and the drone's been deployed. So we do have a feeling that even if they're about to approach the property and now all of a sudden you see a drone throughout the night, is every now and then, and they can't really track the exact time, always able to go around scanning the property. I think even that as a deterrent on its own, beyond just the analytics part of it, works to make the site much safer as well.
Well, Jake, we've certainly talked about a lot today, and every time I talk to you, I learn something more about drones, robotics, or the technology that is on all of these devices. So, in wrap up here, I think everyone will agree that drones and automated robotics are some of the most innovative technologies in the last decade, and they're used in our industry. The security industry should embrace this as a technology, but it's not really just for security. It can be used for many different industries, and we touched on some of that today. As security professionals, we'd like to hear your thoughts. If anyone is currently using them, how are you using them? If you're not, are you considering adding this capability to your profile and your organization? Jake, you've shared a lot of good information with us today on the innovations of drones, robotics, and the offerings that help set you apart from other choices for security professionals. Thanks so much for being a partner of Serverly and a guest on the Security Connection podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. This was awesome.
Also, thanks for tuning into this episode of the Security Connection podcast, please consider subscribing to the podcast on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to your content. And also, if you watch us on YouTube, please hit that notification bell and subscribe to our channel so you know when the next episode is released. We'd really appreciate any ideas for future episodes that you may have. If you have an interesting story or insecurity or one that you think others would enjoy, maybe someone who's made an impact in security or an innovative technology that you're aware of and you'd like to talk about it with us, please let us know. You can also check out our website for more content at serverly.com. And if you're interested in adding drones to your portfolio, you can do that through us in partnership with LandSkyAI. Until next time, be safe, be secure, and stay informed.